When Navy SEALs called for help, trapped and bleeding in enemy fire, only one pilot was ready to fly. Captain Sarah Mitchell faced deadly weather, heavy gunfire, and those who doubted a woman could handle combat. But when lives hung in the balance, she proved them all wrong. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Captain Sarah Storm Mitchell had heard all the whispers before. In the briefing rooms at Bagram Airfield, some of the older pilots would shake their heads when discussing close air support missions, muttering about how combat aviation required nerves of steel and split-second decisions that could mean the difference between saving lives and causing friendly fire casualties. It's not about being politically correct, Major Rick Stevens had said just that morning, glancing meaningfully in her direction. When SEALs are screaming for help with bullets flying, you need someone who won't freeze up. The implication was clear. They questioned whether a woman could handle the intense pressure of flying combat missions where ground troops' lives hung in the balance. Sarah had grown up on military bases, the daughter of a Marine Corps colonel who had taught her that actions spoke louder than words and that respect was earned, not given. She remembered sitting in the back of his government sedan as an 8-year-old, watching F-16s take off from Nellis Air Force Base, dreaming of the day she would be in that cockpit. Her father had never told her she couldn't fly fighters because she was a girl, but the world had plenty of people willing to share that opinion. She had spent 3 years proving herself in the cockpit of the A-10 Thunderbolt II, logging over 200 combat hours and maintaining a weapons accuracy rating that surpassed most of her male counterparts. The Warthog, as pilots called it, was built for one purpose: close air support. Its massive Gu-8 cannon could fire 3,900 rounds of 30mm ammunition per minute, each round weighing nearly 2 pounds and capable of destroying tanks. The aircraft itself was designed around that gun, with titanium armor protecting the pilot and twin engines positioned high to avoid ground fire. It wasn't fast or pretty, but it was devastatingly effective at keeping ground troops alive. Sarah understood the A-10 like few others. She had memorized every system, every limitation, every capability. During training at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, her instructors had been impressed by her ability to put ordnance exactly where it needed to go, even in challenging conditions. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had seen hundreds of pilots come through the program, had pulled her aside after a particularly difficult training exercise. "Mitchell," he had said, "you've got something special. Don't let anyone tell you different." That gray October morning, when the call came in that SEAL Team Bravo was 15 minutes overdue for their radio check-in, Sarah was the only pilot on standby alert. She had been reviewing target folders in the squadron briefing room, studying intelligence photos of suspected Taliban compounds in the Kunar province. The weather forecast showed a rapidly deteriorating situation, a cold front moving in from the north that would bring low ceilings, gusty winds, and possible icing conditions. Not ideal flying weather, but certainly not the worst she had encountered. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, ceiling dropping to 600 feet with winds gusting to 35 knots. Lieutenant Colonel Torres hesitated for just a moment when the radio operator told him Mitchell was their only available close air support asset. Captain Rodriguez, the squadron's weapons officer, was down with food poisoning. Major Williams was already committed to a patrol convoy escort mission in Helmand Province. The next available pilot wouldn't be ready for at least 45 minutes. In that brief pause, Sarah could almost hear the doubt. Was she really the right pilot for a potential combat rescue mission in terrible weather conditions? The doubt evaporated when Bravo 6's desperate voice crackled through the radio static. "Ops. This is Bravo 6. Heavy contact. Need immediate support." The transmission cut out, filled with the sound of automatic weapons fire and explosions, but the message was clear. 8 Navy SEALs were in trouble somewhere in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, and Sarah was their only hope. Torres gave the order without further hesitation: "Launch her. Now." As Sarah ran to her aircraft, she could hear the base operations center coming alive with activity. Intel analysts were pulling up satellite imagery of the last known SEAL position. Weather forecasters were updating their predictions and calculating fuel requirements for extended loiter time in poor conditions. The maintenance crew chief, Technical Sergeant Davis, met her at the aircraft with a thumbs up: "All systems green, full ammunition load, and enough fuel for 3 hours of combat operations." Sarah's A-10 thundered down the runway at Bagram, its twin General Electric engines pushing the heavily loaded aircraft through the morning air. Unlike the sleek fighters that grabbed headlines, the A-10 was built for business, slow, steady, and absolutely lethal when it came to protecting ground troops. The aircraft carried a full combat load: 1,174 rounds of 30mm depleted uranium ammunition for the Gu-8 cannon, 4 AGM-65 Maverick missiles, and 2 LAU-131 rocket pods containing 14 2.75-inch marking rockets each. As she climbed through the deteriorating weather, following valley floors and ridgelines toward Sector 7, Sarah ran through her mental checklist. The target area was in mountainous terrain, with elevations ranging from 4,000 to 8,000 feet above sea level. The Taliban had been increasingly active in the region, using the remote valleys as smuggling routes and staging areas for attacks on coalition forces. Intelligence reports suggested the presence of foreign fighters, Pakistanis and Arabs with advanced weapons and tactics training. The first challenge came 20 miles from the target area when Sarah encountered severe turbulence and icing conditions. The A-10 bucked and shuddered as it flew through the weather front, ice accumulating on the wings despite the aircraft's de-icing systems. Most pilots would have requested permission to climb above the weather, but Sarah knew that would cost precious time and fuel. She pressed on at low altitude, using the terrain to shield her approach and maintaining radio contact with the Tactical Operations Center. She could see muzzle flashes and smoke rising from a compound in the distance. Her radio crackled to life with Lieutenant Commander Jake Hayes' strained voice. Hog 1-2. Thank God. This is Bravo 6 actual. We are pinned down, heavy casualties, need immediate fires on multiple targets. Hayes had been leading SEAL teams for 8 years, with deployments to Iraq, Somalia, and now Afghanistan. His voice carried the controlled urgency of a professional warrior who knew his men were in mortal danger. The SEAL team had been conducting a high-value target capture mission when they walked into a carefully prepared ambush. Intelligence had indicated that a senior Taliban commander was meeting with foreign fighters in the remote compound. What they hadn't expected was that the entire area had been turned into a kill zone, with overlapping fields of fire and predetermined ambush positions. The 8-man team found themselves outnumbered at least 3-1, facing an enemy that had been waiting for exactly this type of operation. The battlefield situation was a close air support pilot's nightmare. The 8-man SEAL team was trapped in a bombed-out compound, taking fire from multiple directions. A sniper in a tower 200 meters north was picking off anyone who showed themselves. RPG teams in the eastern and western treelines were closing in, their rocket-propelled grenades exploding closer with each volley. 2 SEALs were already wounded and bleeding. Petty Officer First Class Martinez had taken shrapnel from an RPG that exploded against the compound wall, while Chief Petty Officer Thompson was dealing with a through-and-through gunshot wound to his left shoulder. Their ammunition was running critically low, and they couldn't expose themselves long enough to mark their exact position with signal devices. Hayes' voice carried the desperation of a leader watching his men die. We're trapped, enemy positions on 3 sides, we have 2 wounded, ammunition critical. The team had been in contact for over an hour, expending most of their rifle ammunition and grenades in the initial firefight. This was the moment that separated experienced close air support pilots from everyone else. Sarah had to identify targets and engage them without clear position markers, in terrible weather, with friendly troops danger close to enemy positions. Through her targeting pod, she could see the compound with the blue tarp that Hayes described, and the 3-story tower where muzzle flashes indicated the sniper's position. The lightning targeting pod provided thermal and optical imagery, but the poor weather conditions made target identification challenging. Anti-aircraft fire began reaching up toward her aircraft, green tracers cutting through the cloudy sky, but Sarah maintained her focus on the mission. The enemy had prepared for air support, positioning 14.5mm heavy machine guns and possibly shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles around the ambush site. Each pass over the target area brought increasing risks, but the SEALs on the ground faced certain death without her intervention. Her first target was the sniper tower. Sarah had to consider wind drift, target angle, and the proximity of friendly forces as she lined up her attack. The tower was only 200 meters from the SEAL position, close enough that a miscalculation could result in fratricide. She studied the structure through her targeting system, identifying the optimal impact point that would collapse the building while directing debris away from her own forces. Rolling her A-10 into a steep dive, Sarah centered her targeting reticle on the structure and squeezed the trigger. The distinctive BRRRT sound of the Gu-8 cannon echoed across the valley as a stream of 30mm rounds pulverized concrete and steel. The depleted uranium projectiles struck with devastating effect, each round carrying more kinetic energy than most artillery shells. The tower collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris, and Hayes' voice immediately came over the radio with obvious relief. Outstanding hit, Hog 1-2. Sniper position destroyed. but the celebration was brief. RPG teams were still closing in from the Trilines, and the SEALs were running out of time. Petty Officer Martinez was losing blood despite first aid efforts, and Chief Thompson was having difficulty returning fire with his wounded shoulder. The team's medic, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Rodriguez, was doing everything possible to stabilize the wounded, but they needed immediate evacuation to a trauma center. The next target was even more challenging. The RPG team in the eastern Triline was only 300 meters from the SEAL position, well within the blast radius of her cannon rounds. A burst of 30 mm fire at that range could send deadly fragments into the compound where her own forces were located. Hayes knew the danger but was desperate enough to accept it. "We know. Do it anyway. We're dead if you don't." Sarah made the decision to switch to marking rockets instead of the cannon, trading some destructive power for precision. The white phosphorus warheads would deliver devastating effects in a much smaller area, reducing the risk of fratricide while still neutralizing the threat. She had practiced this exact scenario dozens of times in training, but this was the first time she had been forced to make such a critical decision with lives hanging in the balance. Her A-10 screamed overhead at low altitude, rockets streaming from the wing pylons and impacting the Triline in a series of brilliant white explosions. The white phosphorus burned at over 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, igniting everything within its blast radius. The undergrowth erupted in flames, silencing the RPG fire and forcing the enemy fighters to retreat deeper into the forest. Petty Officer Jackson's voice carried amazement and gratitude. "Damn, she's good. Right on target." But Sarah's work wasn't finished. Hayes reported enemy reinforcements approaching from the west, a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, racing across open ground toward the compound. The technical vehicle was moving fast across uneven terrain, making it a challenging target for conventional weapons. Sarah had to time her attack perfectly, leading the target and accounting for the vehicle's evasive maneuvers. This was a perfect target for a Maverick missile. The AGM-65 was a fire-and-forget weapon system with an infrared seeker that could track moving vehicles. Sarah locked the seeker onto the technical vehicle and fired, watching the missile streak downward on a pillar of flame. The AGM-65 struck the truck dead center with its 125-pound warhead, vaporizing it in a massive explosion that sent debris flying hundreds of meters. The heavy machine gun fire that had been raking the compound walls suddenly stopped, giving the SEALs their first breathing space in over an hour. But the enemy wasn't finished. Intelligence estimates had been wrong. Instead of facing 15 to 20 fighters, the SEALs were up against at least 40 enemy combatants, many of them experienced foreign fighters who understood small unit tactics and had prepared the battlefield carefully. Hayes' voice came through the radio again, now tinged with exhaustion but still professional. "Hog 1-2, we're seeing movement from multiple positions. They're trying to surround us. We need to move but have 2 wounded who can't walk." Sarah realized that destroying individual targets wouldn't be enough. The enemy was adapting, using the terrain and weather to their advantage, and the SEALs needed an escape route. She began studying the topography around the compound, looking for natural corridors that would provide concealment and cover during a tactical withdrawal. The nearest landing zone for medical evacuation helicopters was over 2 kilometers away, a dangerous journey for a team carrying wounded. Flying through increasingly heavy anti-aircraft fire, Sarah began a systematic campaign to clear corridors of retreat for the ground team. She used her cannon to destroy enemy positions along potential escape routes, her rockets to create smoke screens that would conceal the SEALs' movement, and her remaining Maverick missiles to eliminate the heaviest concentrations of enemy fighters. Each pass brought more ground fire, and she could hear the distinctive ping of small arms rounds striking her aircraft's armored hull, but the A-10 was built to absorb punishment and keep flying. The turning point came when Sarah spotted a mortar position that had been hidden in a dried creek bed, systematically dropping rounds into the compound. The 82mm mortar was the greatest threat to the wounded SEALs who couldn't move quickly. The indirect fire was becoming increasingly accurate as the enemy adjusted their aim, and several rounds had already impacted inside the compound perimeter. Sarah rolled into another steep dive, ignoring the tracers reaching up toward her aircraft, and put a concentrated burst of 30mm rounds directly onto the mortar team. The depleted uranium projectiles tore through the mortar tube and ammunition storage area, creating secondary explosions that echoed across the valley. Suddenly the incoming mortar fire stopped completely, giving the SEALs the opportunity they needed to begin their withdrawal. Hayes' voice over the radio carried a tone Sarah had never heard before, not just gratitude but genuine respect. "Hog 1-2, that was incredible shooting. You just saved our lives. We have a corridor to the north, moving wounded now. The SEALs began their tactical withdrawal, with Hayes and Jackson carrying Martinez on an improvised stretcher while Thompson, despite his wounded shoulder, provided rear security. Sarah continued flying overhead, her fuel running low but her commitment absolute, providing overwatch as the team moved through the dangerous terrain. She had been airborne for over 2 hours, much of it in combat conditions that required maximum engine power and constant maneuvering. The A-10's fuel-efficient turbofan engines gave her more endurance than most fighters, but she was approaching the point where she would need to consider returning to base or requesting aerial refueling. The movement to the landing zone took nearly an hour, with the SEALs moving carefully through terrain that could hide enemy ambush positions. Sarah flew low and slow above them, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. Twice she spotted enemy fighters attempting to intercept the retreating team, and both times she engaged with precision cannon fire that sent the attackers fleeing. When the rescue helicopters finally arrived, 2 UH-60 Black Hawks with escort gunships, Sarah coordinated the extraction, providing security overwatch while the wounded SEALs were loaded aboard. The helicopter crews had been monitoring her radio transmissions during the entire mission and understood the magnitude of what she had accomplished. The lead pilot, Major Thompson, came up on the radio with a simple message: Hog 1-2, outstanding work today. Those boys owe you everything. Hayes' final radio transmission was brief but profound. Hog 1-2, this is Bravo 6. Mission complete, all souls accounted for. We owe you our lives. Outstanding airmanship. Bravo 6 out. Sarah had not only saved 8 Navy SEALs through precision flying and tactical expertise, but had done so under conditions that would have challenged any pilot regardless of gender. The flight back to Bugram was quiet, her A-10 bearing the scars of multiple hits but still flying strong. Post-flight inspection would reveal 14 small arms impacts on the aircraft's armored surfaces, plus damage to the left wing tip from a near miss by an RPG. The titanium armor had done its job, protecting both pilot and aircraft systems throughout the engagement. When she taxied to the flight line, a crowd had already gathered. Word of the mission had spread quickly through the base, how a single A-10 pilot had saved an entire SEAL team trapped deep in enemy territory. Major Stevens was among the first to approach her aircraft as she shut down the engines. The same man who had questioned whether women could handle the pressure of combat aviation now stood at attention and rendered a sharp salute. "Captain Mitchell," Stevens said as she climbed down from the cockpit, "that was some of the finest flying I've ever seen." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Behind him stood a group of maintenance personnel, intelligence officers, and fellow pilots, all waiting to congratulate her on a mission that would be talked about for years to come. The mission reports would detail the technical aspects: 847 rounds of 30mm ammunition expended, 4 Maverick missiles fired, perfect target engagement with 0 friendly fire incidents, and 8 American lives saved. But the real impact went beyond statistics. Sarah had proven what she had always known, that combat aviation effectiveness depends on pilot skill, tactical knowledge, and determination under pressure, not on gender. The SEAL team she saved that day would spend the following week at Bugram, with Martinez and Thompson recovering from their wounds at the base hospital. Each day, one of them would stop by the A-10 squadron to thank Sarah personally. Hayes, the team leader, presented her with a SEAL Team Challenge coin and a simple message: "You're one of us now." In the weeks that followed, Sarah noticed a change in how she was regarded around the squadron. The subtle questioning stopped, the meaningful glances disappeared, and when close air support missions came up, her name was mentioned alongside the most experienced pilots without qualification or hesitation. She had faced the ultimate test of a close air support pilot, protecting ground troops in contact under the worst possible conditions, and had proven herself beyond any doubt. The SEALs she saved that day would never forget the sound of her A-10 roaring through the storm like thunder itself, bringing salvation when all seemed lost. They had called for help, and she had answered with precision, courage, and deadly effectiveness. In the unforgiving world of special operations, where competence matters more than politics and results speak louder than words, Sarah had earned something that couldn't be given or taken away: the absolute trust of warriors who knew their lives might depend on her skills again someday. 6 months later, when the squadron received word that Captain Sarah Storm Mitchell had been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions that day, no one was surprised. The citation read, "For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight as pilot of an A-10 aircraft. Captain Mitchell's exceptional flying skill, tactical expertise, and unwavering dedication to mission accomplishment resulted in the successful rescue of 8 special operations personnel under extreme combat conditions." But those who were there that day knew that the medal, however prestigious, was just metal and ribbon compared to the lives she had saved. Years later, when young female pilots would ask about the challenges of breaking barriers in combat aviation, Sarah would tell them about that October morning in Afghanistan. Not about the skepticism she faced or the barriers she broke, but about the 8 men whose lives hung in the balance and the moment when everything else fell away except the mission. That was when she truly became not just a female pilot or even a good pilot, but simply a pilot, one who could be trusted with the most precious cargo any aviator carries: the lives of American servicemen counting on her to bring them home.